We spent the last week learning what contenders do. Let's put it all together.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers. I'm your host, Nick Zararis. On today's show, we will tie a bow on our Contender Series, where we've gone day by day this week comparing the Oilers to the four teams that made the conference finals in each respective conference. We'll dive a little bit more into the application and the ideas the Oilers can apply directly to their current predicament. To wrap up today's show, we'll focus on the player end of things. In our middle segment, we'll talk coaching, culture, identity. But to start out today's show, because I am a believer that general manager is the most important person in your organization when it comes to changing the direction, when it comes to implementing change and making the team better, we have to start out with the general manager, president of hockey operations, front office. And the way I have this structured, for the most part, is questions to apply to your situation. So the overarching question for front offices, do we understand our goal? And there are a lot of facets, a lot of levels to that. And what I mean by our goal, we might say one thing publicly. The Edmonton Oilers this year were very adamant. We are a Stanley Cup contender. We have gone to the final each of the last 2 years. We believe that we are right there, that if we get the right series of outcomes to break our way, we are capable of competing with anyone. Now, whether or not I could get Stan Bowman on a polygraph or get him to take some truth serum and ask him if he genuinely felt the team he had assembled over the course of the offseason and throughout the course of last regular season was capable of winning the Stanley Cup is a different question. But you need that foundational guiding principle, because if you are unclear on your goals, you are going to have structural issues. And that stems all the way down, from GM to coach to the players. I can give you a litany of examples as it applies to the Oilers. Number one, if the Oilers are Stanley Cup contenders, why are they playing players like David Tomaszek, Trent Frederick, and Andrew Mangiapane in their top six on opening night? I understand that on opening night, you are expecting your lineup to round into form and to take its shape by the end of 82 regular season games. Now, what your lineup looks like on opening night is not necessarily indicative of what it will be like for round one, game one of the playoffs. But no team that truly fancies itself a Stanley Cup contender is going into opening night with that much uncertainty baked into their lineup, unless you're a younger team. You know, if you're Montreal, if you're San Jose, if you're Anaheim, and you have a lot of young and unproven players in your top six, you're hoping that a couple of those guys will take steps in their development. They will progress as hockey players. And then by the end of the season, those guys will make the jump into being top six players. But in the Oilers case, we're talking about guys in their late 20s who have track records. And Tomaszek's a little bit different as a European free agent, but that's your first red flag. Number two, if we're all in agreement and in alignment on what our goal is, everything should relatively fall into place. And I have written down in my notes here, what direction are we getting pulled in? Because if we are a Stanley Cup contender, that means we are going to run a very short bench. That means everybody is very defined and in a specific role to optimize their skill sets. We're not asking guys to do things they're not good at. We have assembled our roster with a nice mix of complementary skill sets. We have forecheckers, we have distributors, we have goal scorers. In an ideal world, we have a couple multifaceted guys who are good at two or all three of those components of hockey, and it gives us flexibility in how we construct our lineup. The next thing I have, if we are a Stanley Cup contender, that means our young players are playing very refined and very niche roles. You go back and look at the last 10 Stanley Cup champions. The vast majority of those teams do not have a single player under the age of 24. The Florida Panthers last year had Mackie Samskovic, outlier. The Avalanche, when they won the Stanley Cup back in 2022, Makar, Bowen Byram come to mind as being guys on the younger end of the spectrum, not a lot of games played. But if you were the Oilers, this is an area where you could have asked valid questions, because this was a team that was playing Ty Emberson. This is a team that had Matt Savoy and then Ike Howard subsequently playing relatively important roles in that first third of the season as Chris Knobloch tried and frankly struggled to find his ideal mix of players. Now, the last question in this big overarching first one, is our goal honest? It is one thing to say, I think we're Stanley Cup contenders. It is another thing to actually mean it. And when you are dishonest with yourself, you are only going to set yourself back. And the big example I would give you for the Oilers this past year, I never felt they were really Stanley Cup good. I thought maybe in their best case scenario, they get out of the Pacific, they lose in the conference finals to whoever comes out of the Central. But if you were honest with your aspirations and what a realistic goal was, you could have put your younger players into more ideal roles and given them a bit more leeway. That's something we talked a lot about on the Montreal episode of the show yesterday, where Marty St. Louis has been very pragmatic, very forward-thinking, and really organized his mindset around, I need to build these guys up to get their confidence to a place where they're going to feel like this is their team. And Matt Savoy and Ike Howard spent a lot of time, 10, 11 minutes per game in that first third of the season. I mean, if Matt Savoy doesn't go down to the AHL during the Olympic break and cook, does he get the opportunity he gets in the second half of the season post-Olympics to really break out? These are valid questions. And when you are operating with a hint of dishonesty about how good your team is, you're going to operate differently. You're going to make trades you arguably shouldn't. Should the Oilers have given a first-round pickup for Jason Dickinson, who they're going to need to re-sign anyway? And look, I know some of that value of that first-round pick is tied to the fact they needed to make Andrew Mangiapane's money go away. But if you never signed Mangiapane in the first place because you were a bit more honest about your goals, maybe you wouldn't have needed to. And as far as GM, the other real key to me is alignment. Do you and your coach get what we're trying to do? Are you on the same page? I always point to the examples in the Moneyball film where Billy Beane and Art Howe are in diametrically opposed camps of how to use certain players to get the most out of them. And ultimately, Billy Beane has to trade away guys to get the lineup he wants, to put players into the roles they're supposed to be in to get the most out of them. It's one thing for the front office to say, we think Trent Frederick can do X, Y, and Z. It's another thing for him to actually go out there and do it. And you saw a direct conflict in the view of a player in the way Trent Frederick was used over the course of the regular season, where at the start of the year, he got a look with McDavid and Draisaitl because he got the long-term contract because the front office bought some equity. I think you look at the way certain players like a Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, because of the equity he has accumulated over the course of his career, he is handled a certain way. Whereas you look at players who have come and gone, like Jeff Skinner, like Victor Arvidsson, who have volleyed up and down the lineup based on what Chris Knobloch wanted from that given game. And it's hard not to feel like certain guys get preferential treatment because the coach is trying to coach the lineup a certain way, as opposed to using the lineup the way the GM had perhaps intended. And then the last point in this opening segment, you got to understand leverage. You need to know when the moment is hot, right? You need to strike when the iron is hot. And like the great Kenny Rogers said, you got to know when to fold them. And you could have made an argument going into the trade deadline this year. The Oilers might have been better off not going as aggressively as they did. And I like Jason Dickinson and Connor Murphy. Connor Murphy was basically the only defenseman to get good underlying results with Darnell Nurse at 5-on-5 in the regular season. But you gave up all those assets to get bounced in 6 games, and now you're sitting here. You got to try and find a way to bring both of those guys back just to maintain what you'd already had, and what you already had lost in 6 games. So that's cause for concern. And when you have leverage, you don't get backed into corners. Stan Bowman did not have leverage. He made that Tristan Jarry trade because he was desperate. He did not have a proactive plan to fix their goalie room. There were a litany of guys over the course of the offseason last year they could have gone after. There were a number of July 1st free agents. The one I, of course, banged the drum on the most was Alex Lyon, who had a really nice regular season in Buffalo and somebody the Oilers could have had for a relatively cheap cost. Now, we are going to take our first break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we return, we'll dive into the coaching lessons of the Final Four teams and how the new Oilers head coach can apply them right after this. If you've got a sweet tooth like I do, you know how tough it is to find that perfect treat without all the sugar. That's why the Fruity Rainbow 5-Hour Energy Shot brings that nostalgic flavor back in a whole new way. Fruity Rainbow 5-Hour Energy Shots treat your taste buds to an explosion of fruity flavor with a tasty caffeine kick. It's a quick, easy way to satisfy that sweet craving while keeping things simple and on the go. I like the fruity rainbow taste because it tastes like candy. It's a zero sugar treat that's sweet tooth approved. I like how convenient it is too. It's a small portable shot I can grab whenever I need a little pick me up. It's my go-to when I want a sweet treat without going overboard. Get candy flavored chaos with Fruity Rainbow 5-Hour Energy Shots, available online now at 5hourenergy.com or over on Amazon. Thank you so much to everybody who is hanging out on this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers as we head on into the weekend. And if you're looking more from your Locked On Oilers experience, you can check out the Everydayer Club. The link is down in the show notes. Cost you a couple bucks a month. Get ad-free episodes of the show on your preferred audio podcast platform and access to the Everydayer Club Discord server chat, where Locked On experts like me and everydayers like yourselves are cutting it up about their favorite teams and leagues. So, continuing our conversation, and to be frank, we have spent a lot of time this offseason so far talking about coaching. Anytime you as a team with Stanley Cup aspirations, regardless of how genuine they are, like we were talking about last segment, your coach is going to serve a lot of roles. I refer to the coach as the jack of all trades, where they are the public messenger. They serve as the buffer between the players and the public. They speak to the media after every single game, almost after every single practice. And they are, in effect, the chief of staff for the organization when it comes to making the operation run. And that public messaging is just one component. On top of that, you need to serve as a life coach, as a counselor, as a strategic entity. I should have said tactical entity, but I wanted to say something cool and I ended up tripping over my words there. I apologize. You do all of those. You have to find ways to connect with all of these guys on an individual basis, because we know now in 2026, the best coaches do not have one size fits all mentalities. We understand that most coaches have found ways, at least the successful one, to connect with each individual player in the preferred way that player likes to be coached, to coax the best out of them. We have come a long way in a not so short period of time when it comes to coaching philosophy. When you look at what coaches were doing 15, 20 years ago, just in terms of leadership and mentality, we are very far away from the fiery guys of the early 2000s, of the guy not that far removed from being a player. Now, that still happens on occasion. You have guys like Marty St. Louis who make the leap, Rod Brindamore make the leap, where they're not too far removed, where they can still find ways to put themselves in the player's shoes. But for the most part, you are talking about a pool of 45 to 50 candidates who continue to cycle through the same 32 jobs. Now, once you become Claude Julien or Gerard Gallant, where you have medical issues or you get to a certain age, then teams stop taking you seriously. Now, I'm not here to say whether or not that's right or that's fair, but that's what happens. You age out where you are no longer considered for jobs, regardless of how good or bad a job you may ultimately do. When it comes to getting the most out of your team, that is where it becomes your coach's responsibility. Now, as Pete Carroll once said when he was hired to be the coach of the New England Patriots back in the 90s, I like our groceries. I don't mind doing the cooking. And when you think about it in that respect, you get your ingredients from the supermarket and it becomes your responsibility to maximize them, to make leftovers if you have portions left over from a main meal. You know, the Anthony Bourdain segment in The Big Short where he's talking about they have leftover halibut and they turn that into a fish soup of the day a few days later when it doesn't sell. That's the mentality you need to have as the coach. It's not so much this player does this. It's this player is good at this. So here's an example for you. We know that Jack Roslovic is very fast in a straight line. We know he has an above average shot. How do we get the most out of him? Well, he needs to play with offensively oriented guys. If we play Jack Roslovic with Adam Henrique, with Matthias Janmark, with Trent Frederick, Curtis Lazar, he's not going to be able to do the most with his skill set. Furthermore, when we use a guy with Jack Roslovic's skill set on a third or a fourth line, he's not going to get to play as many shifts. He is going to be playing with guys who do not have offensive instincts. And furthermore, something we've heard Chris Knobloch say a lot at least heard Chris Knobloch say in the past tense, now that he's no longer the coach, those skill guys don't fit what his vision for a third or a fourth line is in the contemporary NHL. We can argue until we are collectively blue in the face whether or not a third line or a fourth line needs to play a specific style to be effective. You can point to examples like that Blake Coleman, Andrew Mangiapane, and Michael Backlund Flames line from a couple of years ago. That was a dominant volume possession line that had 55 to 60% of the shot attempts and the scoring chance attempts. I could point you in the direction of the Marchand, Lundell, Estu Luosterainen line in last year's playoffs that dominated possession at even strength and scored a ton of goals off of high danger and high expected goal value scoring chances. There is no one set way to do this, but if we're stuck with guys who are tweeners, where I don't have a great fit for them in the top six because I like certain complements better. When Jesperi Kapanen was out, it made sense that Jack Roslovic was filling that spot in the lineup, playing on the second line with Draisaitl and with Podkolzin. When Kapanen returned, it became more challenging to find a role for Roslovic. And that's where you get into the question of how do I get the most from this guy? And when you have a balanced lineup, this isn't a hard thing. This is a luxury. You know, I point to the Oilers lineup in 2024 or in 2025, where in the Stanley Cup playoffs, the Oilers had multiple versions of four viable lines at even strength. Through the first two rounds of the playoffs last year, the Oilers had four lines all running an even or better goal share at even strength. When you have that much depth, there's a lot of opportunities. And when you have that much depth, you have flexibility. If you need to go to McDavid and Draisaitl in a pinch, your second, third, fourth lines do not become ineffective. They do not become placeholder lines. If anything, that gives you opportunities to get a third player featured with McDavid and Draisaitl. We saw them do this a lot with Corey Perry in the Stanley Cup final. But when you look at, say, Matt Savoy or Jack Roslovic or Ike Howard or Jeff Skinner or Victor Arvidsson, the guys who have top six traits but haven't earned enough equity with the coach and the front office to earn that role, but we still need to find ways to use them. And that makes the argument for, well, the third line should have a skill component to it as well. That way we can feature more skilled players throughout our lineup. And some coaches, as we saw with Chris Knobloch, are not going to be comfortable doing that. I think as we go further into the future and the average NHL player becomes a better skater, they have more puck skills, they're a better shooter, you are going to continue to see the depth and quality of lineups continue to grow. You are going to watch third lines become viable scoring components over time. And it won't happen overnight. And the ease at which teams score now, where teams are scoring more than ever on fewer shots than ever, you are going to see that balance, that return on an offense begin to become a new question of if everybody's leaning towards offense in the way we construct our lineups, is there missed value in perhaps focusing on defense or focusing on goaltending? It's one of the questions we have to ask about the sport going forward, but it is something I find compelling. We are going to take our second and final break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we return, we will dive into the player side of this because, yes, the players have a role in how the organization operates as well. Right after this.
Hello, I'm JD Young of Locked On Sharks, and as a father, I want to make sure that my kids will be protected in case the unimaginable happens. When my wife and I sat down to discuss life insurance, we found that Ethos was our best option. Ethos makes getting life insurance fast and easy, 100% online. Get a quote in seconds, apply in minutes, and get same-day coverage. There's no medical exam. You just answer a few simple health questions. You get up to $3 million in coverage with some policies as low as $30 a month. And you know you're going to get the lowest rate from their network of trusted carriers. So take 10 minutes to get covered today with life insurance through Ethos. Get your free quote at ethos.com/lockedonNHL. That's ethos.com/lockedonNHL. Applications times vary. Rates may vary.
Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers. And if you're an everydayer, you know I am almost always on the player side. I find a lot of the conjecture and the conversation about players to be ridiculous a lot of the time. The idea that players don't want to win, that they're not competing hard enough, that they don't want it bad enough. It's one of the most ludicrous threads we hear in conversation amongst the talking heads of legacy media, or I would say the more traditional hockey media. I think if anything, your goal as a coach, and this is tied directly to the players, is building their confidence. Because the more a player plays with confidence, the more they're going to be able to do. One of the key components of watching a young player emerge, Matt Savoy is someone who comes to mind, is them getting a feel for what they need to do to be successful. That's why the early stages of a player's career at the NHL level are so crucial to their development. Well, the actual results, goals for and against, scoring chances, specials, when we're talking about that, I'm not as concerned. But does the kid look like they belong? Does the game look like that it's too fast for them? Are they in the right place at the right time? Are they making plays happen, not only for themselves and for others? Are they going out of their way to get involved? Are they forechecking well? Are they finding ways to get puck touches? That is one of the single strongest denominators amongst the dominant player in our sport. How often do they have the puck on their stick? And yes, if you have the puck a lot, you're going to turn the puck over a lot. That's just the trade-off there in usage rate. And as a player, your number one goal is trying to find the right play. Now, hockey is extremely subjective. These decisions are made instinctually. These are not conscious. I need to do this because this. It is being able to process plays so quickly that the stick in the puck, when it's in your possession, the puck on your stick, when it's in your possession, you are able to make those decisions without thinking. It is as if the puck is a part of you. And the great players in our sport have short memories. They are able to get over mistakes. They are able to carry on. What that looks like for guys is different. Some players are going to sulk. Some guys are going to be self-deprecating and get on themselves and want to be coached very hard, want to be yelled at in their face. Some guys are looking for the kid gloves approach. Some players would like to be built up and coached up and make them feel like, hey, it's a mistake. It's okay. That's part of the process of learning. What I have written down here for the player segment, am I empowered in my role? What is my role? So if I'm a third line winger, am I doing my job? Am I making sure we're keeping the puck down at the other end of the rink? Am I making sure that when the puck is on my side, I'm not just doing a flyby, I am putting pressure on that puck. Whether the puck is moving or it is stationary with the player in possession, I am making sure that puck at least gets a cursory, respectful pressure from me. If I am coming back into a play, am I skating as hard as I can or am I gliding? If I'm tired, why am I tired? Was I chasing the play around or was I doing my job? There are levels to this. And one of my big pet peeves now in the NHL, especially on American TV, is whenever they do a highlight package, whoever the former player is that's doing the analysis is pointing a hockey stick at a big board and retroactively nitpicking the mistake as it happens because they have the benefit of both hindsight and the top-down view. It's one of the big problems with the way we watch hockey on TV is that it is not very reflective of what the players on the ice are actually seeing. Because we have a significantly better perception of spacing and where everyone is, it's easy for us to critique and to point out these mistakes. Now, it does help when you have the luxury of going back to watch the tape. The tape does not lie. If you grind out the tape, you can get a better understanding of players. Now, we said that example before of the third line winger. Am I putting pressure on the other team's defense? Am I contributing to an effective cycle game? All of these little things. Now, if I'm Zach Hyman, let's use Zach Hyman as an example, because this is the type of player mentality you want. And Zach Hyman is a longtime pro at this point. He's 33 years old. He's going to ride out the rest of that contract, one of the best contracts in the history of NHL free agency. But this is a player who took a personal accountability and took a real ownership over the trajectory of his career. He leaves Toronto, where he has a really nice start to his career. It takes a little while to get going as far as being a top six player, but he does. Then he comes to Edmonton and he bets on himself. Not content to just be a supporting cast member. Of course, there was probably a bit of a conversation about what his role would be should he sign with Edmonton. But we have seen a lot of different wingers over the years play on McDavid's right or left, basically none of them have played this well as often as Hyman has. And yes, Draisaitl does technically count as being a McDavid winger from time to time. But Zach Hyman understood, if I'm going to play with Connor McDavid consistently, I need to be in the right place at the right time at the net front, because he is going to draw a lot of attention to himself. When we're on the power play, can I eat cross checks? Can I occupy that space at the net front? How can I be useful when I don't have the puck? Well, I'm going to hit everything that moves. I'm going to pressure hyper aggressively on the forecheck, and I'm going to create second and third scoring chances by virtue of my aggressiveness on the forecheck. These are all interconnected ideas and build off of how a player grows into a role and ultimately takes ownership of that role. Now, some guys, like I said before, are going to sulk. They are going to need to be pulled out of the mud. Some guys are the rah-rah, banging on their chest, screaming at the top of their lungs type. Whatever works for that player is fine. But when you get to the bad ends, when you get to a player who is in their own head and cannot get out, what do you do? If you're in the Darnell Nurse position, where you have consistently struggled for extended periods of time of the last few seasons, you refuse to change your decision-making, the team has rotated a laundry list of partners for you to try and get better play out of you. They have changed your role, they have changed your responsibility, and you're still not getting better results. That weighs on you. If you're Tristan Jarry and you're on your second team in 2 years where you have lost your starter's job to a backup goalie, what does that do to your mentals? How do you get that guy back from the brink? We saw Stuart Skinner in each of the last two playoff appearances in 24 and 25 get benched at points for Calvin Pickard, but he was able to scrape himself up off the floor, have that short memory, find ways to be effective in the conference final against the Dallas Stars both times, ultimately came up short in the Stanley Cup final both times, but at least demonstrated enough mental fortitude that they were able to get through to the other side. And I really focus on the idea of a player's preparedness, their confidence, because I think that's going to inform a lot of how a guy is going to play. If someone is struggling, if they're fighting it, they're making the safe play, they're making the easy play, and that's fine. You have hundreds of plays to make in a given game. If the majority of your plays are safe and responsible, that's okay. We want our best players taking the biggest swings. That's really the challenge, and that's the fine line. What becomes a good decision, what's a bad decision, might not be realized for another 35 to 45 seconds. And it really presents a fun possibility and a fun conversation as to how we get more from our guys and what we can do to get more out of them. So I hope this week of shows has given you a bit of a greater perspective on some of the ideas within our game across the organizations that are successful in our league. I hope you have learned at least something, or at least maybe reframe the way you think about certain topics. That will do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. Thank you so much to everybody who made Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 stream sports podcast network. For your second listen, go check out Locked On NHL Game Night. If you are watching over on YouTube, we send you to the first ever 24/7 national Locked On YouTube channel. I will talk to you guys on Monday. Everyone have a safe and fun weekend, and we will start talking free agents, restricted free agents, trade targets, and buy low candidates as we start to pivot towards the transaction window of the NHL offseason. Everyone have a safe and fun weekend. I will talk to you guys on Monday. Until then, let's go Oilers.